Has it ever happened to you that you hear something in your house and decide to ignore it? Thinking, it's just the wind, maybe a pipe. But then, the sound comes back, and this time, it seems to be coming from inside the walls. The story you're about to hear happened to someone just like you. Someone who thought they were safe in their own home until they weren't. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will make you check every corner of your house before going to bed tonight. It all started in a house like this. Carla, a young graphic designer, had just moved in alone after saving for years. It was her first place of her own, a space where she felt she could start fresh. Things that, at first, seemed insignificant. First, it was that sound, a faint scratching noise, barely noticeable, coming from the bedroom wall. Rats, Carla thought, though it was odd. The house was new, perfectly insulated, but she didn't give it much importance until the sound started to move. One night, as she tried to sleep, the noise stopped, only to start again, right behind her headboard. This time, it was different. It was a whisper. Carla thought she was imagining things, until she felt a hard knock on the wall, as if someone was knocking from the other side. Finally, she decided to face her fear. During the day, she inspected every corner. Nothing seemed out of place, but the sound persisted. She decided to call a contractor who removed a section of the wall. And what they found defied explanation. A tunnel, small, narrow, as if something had been living there. But there were no rats, no remains, just marks, as if something with hands had been scratching to get out. That night, Carla decided to stay at a friend's place. But when she arrived at her apartment, something was waiting for her. That same night, as she slept on the couch, her friend heard something, a whisper. But this time, it didn't come from a wall. It came from Carla. When they woke her up, Carla didn't remember anything, but on her arm were scratches, perfectly parallel, too deep to have been made by a person. What she heard the next day was not of this world. Laughter, voices, as if a group of people were whispering right next to the recorder, even when she had been alone. Carla left the house that same week, but the activity didn't stop. Every tenant who tried to live there reported the same sounds, whispers, scratches. To this day, the house remains empty. But there's more. Carla didn't fully escape. Do you think something like this could happen in your house? Let me know in the comments if you dare to listen to a recording of your bedroom at night. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. If you dare. The return of the whispers. After fleeing that house, Carla thought she had finally found peace. Her new apartment was smaller, but cozy. No tunnels, no creaking walls, and no strange shadows. At least, that's what she thought for the first few days. But the whispers never stayed behind. The first sign was a sensation. That inexplicable feeling of not being alone. Bah! Carla. Tired. It's just my mind playing tricks on me, she told herself. And then, on the very first night, they came back. This time, the sound wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from her closet. Carla tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had left it there before she moved in. But deep down, she knew this wasn't a coincidence. That night, she decided to do the same thing she had done in her old house. Leave a recorder running in her room. This time, she needed proof. Something to confirm she wasn't losing her mind. On the recording, she heard footsteps, but not on the floor. They sounded as if someone was walking directly above her bed. Then the whisper returned. But this time, it said something. That same day, her downstairs neighbor decided to speak to her. Apparently, he had heard noises coming from her unit. Have you been moving furniture at night? Because it sounds like something's being dragged, but it sounds as if it's coming from the ceiling. That night, Carla decided to investigate. She remembered what she had found in her old house. And with a flashlight in hand, she inspected every corner of the apartment. Finally, in the closet, she discovered something. There were more marks. And this time they weren't empty. Something was moving. What do you think Carla saw when she turned around? What's behind the tunnel? Let me know your theories in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter, where we'll uncover what truly hides in the darkness. Carla had never felt anything as cold as that moment. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving a void that weighed heavily on her chest. Every muscle in her body wanted to move, but something stronger kept her frozen. The sensation of being watched was so intense it hurt. Like 1,000 invisible eyes were fixed on the back of her neck. And then she heard the breathing. It was deep, uneven, as if something was panting behind her. It couldn't be her imagination. It was too real, too close. She tried to convince herself it was the echo of her own fear. But something about the sound was different. A rhythm that didn't belong to a human. Carla turned slowly, as if her movements were trapped in a nightmare where time stretches cruelly. And then she saw it, or rather, she saw something. In the dim light, she could barely make out a tall, twisted figure. It had no face, just a silhouette that seemed to warp with every blink, as if its existence couldn't hold steady in this reality. But what terrified Carla the most were the hands. Long, bony, and covered in what looked like scars. These hands were slowly scratching the wall behind her, creating a sound so grating it pierced her nerves. Before she could scream, the figure disappeared. It didn't fade away like a ghost. It was simply no longer there. The air returned to its heavy stillness, but this time, Carla could move. She collapsed to the floor, gasping and trembling, trying to rationalize what she had seen. But there was no logic that could explain it. That night, Carla didn't sleep. She sat in a corner of her living room, with all the lights on, and a kitchen knife in her hand, as if that could protect her from something that wasn't human. Her mind kept repeating the same questions over and over. What was that? What does it want from me? Why is it following me? But she found no answers. The next morning, she made a decision. She couldn't stay there any longer. She began packing her things hurriedly, but as she boxed up the last items, something caught her attention. The tunnel. She couldn't just leave it there without knowing what it was. It was as if the darkness was challenging her, inviting her to uncover its secret. Against all logic, Carla felt she needed to go down, not out of curiosity, but because of a strange feeling that, if she didn't, whatever was tormenting her would never leave her alone. Armed with a flashlight and her phone, Carla prepared to descend. She tied a rope to the frame of her bed, ensuring she had a way to climb out quickly. if something went wrong. The tunnel was deeper than it seemed, and the air inside was dense, filled with a metallic, rancid smell that churned her stomach. The walls were covered in scratches, some fresh, some older, as if generations of something had been trapped there, desperately clawing to get out. As she went further, she began to notice symbols carved into the walls. They weren't random marks. They were patterns, as if someone had deliberately drawn them. Some resembled eyes, others distorted human forms, but all seemed to stare directly at Carla. Her flashlight began to flicker, and fear turned into pure adrenaline. Finally, she reached the bottom of the tunnel. There, in the darkness, she found something she never could have expected. A small room, almost like a cell. In the center stood an old, worn chair, and on it rested a doll made of rags, bound with dark strings. But the most disturbing thing was the doll's face. It was stitched together with what looked like human skin. And the eyes were real. Human. Carla stepped back, terrified, but something on the ground caught her attention. There was a journal. She picked it up with trembling hands and began to read the first pages. It was handwritten in hurried scrawls and smeared ink. It was the diary of someone named Ivan, and in its pages was a warning. If you find this place, never turn your back, never run, and above all, never let it take you. Because if it does, you will never be yourself again. In that moment, Carla felt something on her shoulder. A cold touch ran down her skin like an electric shock. She turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Or at least, nothing she could see. She dropped the journal and ran for the exit, climbing up the tunnel as fast as she could. But as she climbed, the whisper returned, clearer, louder this time. Carla, I will always be with you. When she finally emerged, she sealed the tunnel and covered the hole with everything she could find. She promised herself she would never go back. But as she grabbed her backpack to leave, she noticed something terrifying. The doll she had seen in the tunnel was now sitting on her bed. And in its eyes, there was something new. Tears. Tears that hadn't been there before. Carla thought she could escape, but whatever was in that tunnel no longer needed a place to hide. Now, it was with her.